What Would Errol Do? A brief introduction to the octagonal philosophy of Errol Flynn, written by David Christopher Lane, narrated by Jason Zenobia. Dedication to accepting the shadow and the light as part of being human. Introduction. I first learned of Errol Flynn's life and work when, by chance, I happened upon his autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, in audio format at the Huntington Beach Library some 2 decades ago. It was an exhilarating find, as it is one of the funniest and most insightful books I have ever listened to in my life. In fact, it was so good that I got a copy of the book and read it cover to cover again, and I was even more mesmerized by Errol Flynn's hilarious stories and pithy insights the second time around. I became an instant fan and sought out as much information as I could about this charming rogue who had starred in some of the most popular movies in Hollywood from the 1930s and 1940s, including his breakout role in Captain Blood. Besides being regarded as one of the handsomest men to ever adorn the silver screen, Flynn was also a scandalous character in real life, skirting the very edges of what was legally permissible during his day. Yet, what I found most endearing about Flynn was his philosophy about life and how open he was about his own contradictory nature. Over time, I read everything I could by and about Errol Flynn, including his underrated novel Beam Ends, published in 1937. Although Flynn starred in a number of successful movies ranging from The Adventures of Robin Hood to Dodge City to The Sun Also Rises, his life was cut short at the age of 50 from a heart attack, though his liver was also severely damaged. He lived an outsized life, pushing the limits with excessive amounts of alcohol and narcotics. His womanizing was legendary and got him caught in a number of troublesome binds, not the least of which is his infamous statutory rape trial of 1942, for which he was ultimately acquitted. Flynn was not a stereotypical Hollywood star, given that he had a deep interest in oceanography and had an avid interest in philosophy and science. His father, Theodore, was one of the foremost Darwinian scholars in the world, who was also a distinguished professor in his own right. Errol had a tumultuous and complicated relationship with his mother, Lily Mary Young, who severely disapproved of his bohemian ways. What makes Errol Flynn so continually fascinating is that he lived a life that was so adventurous and seemingly impossible. It borders on the surreal, particularly given the cultural norms of that time period. Refreshingly, Flynn makes no apologies for his lifestyle and even revels in his iconoclastic ways. It is difficult, if not misleading, to summarize Errol Flynn's philosophy in just 2 sentences. Yet, I do think Flynn captures the essence of his thinking when he opines, "I know that truth is sometimes an octagon, and that I am one. Contradiction is a cardinal element of life, and of itself may be no contradiction." To the amusement of my students at Mount San Antonio College, around the turn of the millennium, I began using Errol Flynn's autobiography in some of my philosophy courses, since it embodies hedonistic existentialism. During this time, one of my students, who was brought up as a devout follower of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, was so taken by Errol Flynn's philosophy and transformed by his outlook on life that he took his Book of Mormon and cut out the inside pages and replaced it with a fresh copy of My Wicked, Wicked Ways. He would walk around school with his newfound Bible. This is just the sort of sacrilegious act that most likely would have met with Errol Flynn's seal of approval, since he disdained overt religious moralizing and was himself a non-believer. Now, it should be stated that Errol Flynn's writings are filled with exaggerations, if not downright fibs. But this too is part and parcel of his character, since Flynn didn't mind stretching the truth, and one's credulity, for the retelling of a good yarn. I realized this early on after learning more about Flynn's life, since even though his autobiography is a terrific book, one is never quite sure where fiction begins and fact skims off the pages. In any case, I think there is much merit in reading Flynn closely and directly, since his philosophy on life has an immediacy often lacking in drier tomes that are wrapped up in the guise of academic respectability. The following book contains a series of pregnant quotes from Errol Flynn, with occasional commentary by myself, conjoined with a treasure trove of photographs of him throughout his career. The contradictory nature of being human. I know that truth is sometimes an octagon, and that I am one. Contradiction is a cardinal element of life, and of itself may be no contradiction. No, contradiction has a place in human nature, in social values, just as it has in mathematics. Contradiction is neither true nor false. It is. My awareness of my own paradox does only one thing to me. It makes me laugh. When I see and sense myself doing something inconsistent, opposite to what I think I believe, I realize it and I laugh. What else can you do when you're all rolled up in the same package of personality? Here is duality and singularity at the same time. I know that it is possible to say something at one time and believe it, and I know it is true, and to say its opposite at another time, and it can, in other circumstances, be just as true. In me, contradiction itself, as a principle, finds its own raison d'être. I am convinced of the validity of contradiction. There are many worlds. Each is true, at its time, in its own fashion. On unpredictability and unknowingness. After 30 years of circling the globe, I can shed no light on the cosmos. But what makes people tick? That is clearer in mind than it was when I was young. I have learned that you can't trust a human being to behave as you would have expected in a given circumstance. You can never rely upon it. Men and women are both very unpredictable. You can only guess what people will do. Has anything changed? As I have gotten older, as I move towards the halfway mark, I find nothing has changed. I think a man's pattern in life very seldom changes, but the chances I take may be of a different character. I have quested all my life for truths, and I wallow in bromides. The bromides themselves wallow in truth. A traveller's conclusion. The words human nature, human being, humanity are the most misused words in our vocabulary. The human as a species is the same universally, but his behaviour varies in different places. I behave differently in the south of France than I do in England. On women, love, and sex. Is woman a universal creature? Does a man take all women to bed when he takes one to bed? My chief delusion, if it is a delusion, is that I have learned as much about sex as Freud. Don't let anybody tell you sex isn't the most important drive in life except hunger. Otherwise there would be no humans on Earth, no other life of any kind. I pretend to be nothing but realistic. Favorite occupation. A prolonged bout in the bedroom. The greatest calamity. Castration. Tell me of a paradox. Is there not some percentage of woman in each man, and some man in each woman? And if so, is this not contradiction, and is it not true? I want faith, and I am faithless. Women do not let me stay single. I do not let myself stay married. Sometimes I think I would like to end my days in a whorehouse. I hate the legend of myself as a phallic representation, yet I work at it to keep it alive. On truth and death. I have no fear of the hereafter because I believe there is no such thing. I have been afraid of dying before my time, or dying violently, or of having some unpleasant method of leaving. But as I am a complete agnostic, this leaves me philosophic. Why be afraid of something I have no control over? It seems absurd, ridiculous and laughable that somebody should tell me how to behave during my brief span here on earth. I feel like rebelling every time I think of it. A rough, bemused, rugged individualist, I was born this way, and that is the way I will die. I have no clear-cut system of philosophy. I want none. I want no design for living. I want no one to tell me how to live. I will take it from day to day. I follow no leaders, no set of rules, and don't anyone lay down rules for me. I intend to live the first half of my life. I don't care about the rest. I suppose most of us act all our lives. We have a facade, a front. We imagine ourselves to be what we're not, don't we? My job is to defy the normal. On sailing and happiness. Percy Island was only the first of many reef islands we found with a blazing beauty, blue and green lagoons and submerged coral gardens that beggar description. In fact, the wonders of the Great Barrier must be seen to be realized, the exotic glory of the outer reef laid bare by the falling tide. Lovely submarine flowers that live by the murder of tiny fish, birds of all colours in millions, from the small green honeybirds that chirp in the trees to the myriad battalions of mutton birds that darken the sky as they go out to catch fish that are every colour under the sun. Excerpted from Flynn's novel, Beam Ends. The number and variety of the denizens of the rocks and pools are far beyond the compass of any book. From the tiniest things, so small a microscope is necessary to distinguish their lines, to the 16-foot tiger shark and, even more dreaded by skin divers, the 500-pound groper. All have their own personal appearance, distinct characteristics, and method of earning a living. Excerpted from Flynn's novel, Beam Ends. In the peace and quiet of port, old sailors spin their yarns, telling tales of the southern seas, how once they sailed into the still, blue lagoon, beached their boat on the gleaming sand, and walked beneath the coconut palms and lovely tropic vines to the native village. From the brown thatched houses came laughing men and women, strong brown men and handsome girls, who gave them strange and delicious fruits, and who decked them with sweet garlands of flowers. Excerpted from Flynn's novel, Beam Ends. But always, ever present behind the brightness of this picture, there lay a gloomy shadow, the shadow of the coral. To the ancient mariners it was no thing of beauty. It was a horror and a nightmare, worse dreaded than the iceberg or fog or any terror of the northern seas. Today, the lure of the beautiful, treacherous coral seas still exact a heavy price from those who seek adventure. We found it so. Excerpted from Flynn's novel Beam Ends. My dream of happiness. A quiet spot by the Jamaica seashore, looking out at the activity in the ocean, hearing the wind sob with the beauty and tragedy of everything, looking out over 9 miles of ocean, hearing some happy laughter nearby, sitting under an almond tree with the leaf spread over me like an umbrella. That is my dream of happiness. Unfortunately, an hour later, I might not be happy with that. What would I be like at 70? At 70, I confidently hope I will have had at least 8 more wives, have grown a stomach that I can regard with respect, and can still walk upstairs to the bedroom without aching or groaning. Editor's note: Errol Flynn died at age 50. I have a zest for living, yet twice an urge to die. Errol Flynn. A brief biography excerpted from tcm.com. He lived bigger than life and died doing so. Errol Flynn romped through as much adventure off-camera as his characters did in his signature swashbuckling movies. Dubbed the most beautiful man who ever lived by screen diva Joan Crawford, Flynn reached the heights of showbiz success in action-adventure flicks such as Captain Blood, 1936, The Adventures of Robin Hood, 1938, and pseudo-historical films such as The Charge of the Light Brigade, 1936, and They Died with Their Boots On, 1941. He fought his pretty action hero typecasting, yet recognized his own artistic limitations, even as he leveraged his charms into as many couplings as might be considered legal, and some that weren't. Living fast and scandalously, Flynn set the bar for hedonistic hijinks in Hollywood's golden age, ever acting out a lavish Peter Pan complex afforded him by his movie star means and inevitably exceeding them. He was born Errol Leslie Thompson Flynn in Hobart, Tasmania, Australia, on June 20, 1909. His marine biologist father, Theodore Flynn, taught at the local college, while Errol grew up distant from his mother, Mary Lily Flynn, who at one point branded him a nasty little boy. She left the family not long after they moved to Sydney in 1920, and while he maintained a good relationship with his father, his studies faltered as he began developing what would become his lovable rake personality. He became sexually active early, fought and got expelled from school, ran into trouble when caught embezzling from a menial job, and, just 17, bolted for New Guinea, then amid a latter-day gold rush. He found no gold, but by his sometimes fabulous recounting in his autobiography, My Wicked, Wicked Ways, this led to early intrigues, including life-threatening bouts with the law and cuckolded husbands, and a whirl of jobs, including diamond smuggler, pearl diver, reporter, bird trapper, gigolo, and charter boat captain. As the latter, his chiseled looks caught the attention of an Australian movie producer who cast him in the Wake of the Bounty, 1933, as famed mutineer Fletcher Christian. One of Christian's crew members was actually an ancestor of Flynn. He continued his prodigal hand-to-mouth meanderings from China to India to France, then England, where he found some stage work, which led to the lead in a B film by Warner Brothers UK studio, Murder at Monte Carlo, 1935. This got the attention of Warner's stateside brass, which decided to import Flynn. He met Lily Damita, a tempestuous French actress, 8 years his senior, on the ship to the US, and they commenced a torrid relationship, climaxing in a June 1935 marriage. Not long into his WB tenure, Robert Donat flaked on the lead in the upcoming sea adventure Captain Blood, leading the studio, after exhausting all options, to go with its Aussie newcomer. Flynn, nervous to start off with, clashed with director Michael Curtiz, even as he played practical jokes on his 19-year-old limpid-eyed love interest, Olivia de Havilland. They demonstrated such on-screen spark, which manifested off-screen, but de Havilland has long intimated it never went beyond teasing and fervent flirtation, that WB codified the two, plus Curtiz, as a winning formula to be reconstituted the next year in The Charge of the Light Brigade. The second of Flynn's 12 pictures with Curtiz, a relationship of mutual loathing that would escalate into physical tussles, and of 8 co-starring de Havilland, Charge would also be the first of a succession of historically based adventure films that gaily shredded history. Charge had Flynn and Brigade saving the day and assuring victory at the Crimean War's Battle of Balaclava versus the criminal disaster the Charge actually was. Santa Fe Trail, 1940, and They Died with Their Boots On would be similarly cavalier. The first, a sanitized, racially condescending account of future Civil War figures Jeb Stuart, Flynn, and George Custer, Ronald Reagan, tracking down terroristic abolitionist John Brown. The second, canonizing Custer, Flynn this time, amid his historically less than heroic Indian campaigns. He and Curtiz would do more pat westerns such as Dodge City, 1939, and even comedies such as For's a Crowd, 1938. But costume adventures would be the Flynn trademark, the likes of The Prince and the Pauper, 1937, The Adventures of Robin Hood, and The Private Lives of Elizabeth and Essex, 1939. And another pirate outing, The Sea Hawk, 1940, all featuring him at his dashing, fencing, anti-authoritarian best. In Robin Hood, when de Havilland's Marion charges him with speaking treason, Flynn's title character giddily retorts, fluently. Robin Hood proved his blockbuster, shot in Technicolor and costing an unheard-of $2 million, but making a then impressive $4 million at the box office. The garish Elizabeth and Essex put him opposite Betty Davis, an oil and water mix, Flynn the arrogant upstart who made no pretense at art, Davis the intrepid artiste, later recounting how Flynn, upon their screen kisses, would tongue-kiss her, a taboo in film then, with the taste of the previous night's bender in his mouth. In one scene that called for her to fake slap him, Davis walloped Flynn, prompting a genuine, near-violent reaction still evident in the film. His lifestyle had already become notorious for epic partying and, in spite of his ongoing, if tumultuous marriage, his prolific sexual appetites, with partners of both sexes, tabloid-scented biographies alleged in more recent years, though widely disputed. He and Damita would reconcile for brief periods, in one of them producing a son, Sean, but finally divorced in 1942. Flynn's raucous circle of friends included actors Bruce Cabot, Guy Williams, and the venerable John Barrymore, stuntman Buster Wiles, and director Raoul Walsh, who, after W.B. finally sprung Flynn from Curtiz's indenture, directed him in Boots On and the lovable rogue boxing picture Gentleman Jim. Walsh allegedly made Flynn the butt of one of history's most legendary practical jokes. Just after the May 1942 death of Barrymore, Walsh borrowed Barrymore's corpse from the funeral home, propped it in a chair in Flynn's house with a lit cigarette just before the latter drunkenly stumbled in to be scared witless. But 1942 had more discomfiture than that in store for Flynn. With the US newly entered into World War II, he found his enlistment rejected, diagnosed with a weak heart. With the star a newly minted US citizen, this threatened to subvert his heroic image and stymied Flynn's ability to make good on his anti-fascist sentiments, sharpened during a 1937 trip to Spain during the country's tragic civil war. Then, in the fall of 1942, police in Santa Monica turned up a missing person, Betty Hansen, a 17-year-old Midwestern girl who had come to visit her sister and disappeared. They found among her possessions the unlisted phone numbers of Flynn and Cabot. Hansen claimed she met them in September at a party at Cabot's house where she had sex with Flynn. Soon thereafter, the L.A. County District Attorney unearthed a previous allegation of the family of now 16-year-old Peggy Satterley, who claimed she had had sex with Flynn during a weekend-long party on his yacht. Flynn was charged with statutory rape and, during the ensuing media circus trial, reportedly kept a plane waiting at a nearby airstrip to take him to Mexico. But defense attorney to the stars Jerry Geisler effectively cast doubts on the motives and veracity of both girls. Flynn earnestly denied having sex with either, and the jury acquitted him. Curiously, during the trial, Flynn got acquainted with 18-year-old Nora Eddington, daughter of the county sheriff who worked at the Hall of Justice, and they married in August 1943. They would have a daughter, Rory, who insisted years later that her mother went into it with eyes open. She told him right up front, "You can do whatever you want when you're at the studio, but the one thing you can never do is bring it home." The scandal would introduce the phrase "in like Flynn" into American vernacular as a euphemism for successful seduction. He, Walsh, and W.B. would attempt to compensate for his apparent wartime frivolity by pitting him against the Germans and Japanese in a series of movies, mostly taut, espionage-themed actioners like Desperate Journey, 1942, Northern Pursuit, 1943, and Objective Burma, 1945. A rare World War II-era film that effectively renders war's horrors, but also a flop that some consider among his best films, Uncertain Glory, 1944. Flynn saw the picture as one that would give him a chance to spread his thespian wings, a noir-y film that sets him as a morally ambivalent thief in Nazi-occupied France who agrees with an apolitical policeman to cop to an act of sabotage by the French resistance to spare villagers German reprisals, building tension as to whether the rogue will do the right thing or not. But his post-war outings would prove mediocre B-fare, only returning him to dashing form as the freebooting Lothario in Adventures of Don Juan, 1948, and showing some non-action acting chops the next year on a loan out to MGM as a cold, manipulative husband in That Forsyte Woman. Loanouts would tender his most notable efforts, such as another colonial adventure for MGM, Kim, 1950, and Universal reviving his pirate adventurism with Against All Flags, 1952. During the production, co-star Maureen O'Hara noted that Flynn exhibited consummate professionalism, prepped and ready with his lines to start the day, but would inevitably be drunk by 4 p.m. One story has him, when booze was banned from the set, bringing oranges injected with vodka. Flags did well enough that WB greenlit a final Flynn swashbuckler under its imprint, The Master of Ballantrae, 1953. But WB would abrogate his contract soon after. He attempted an ambitious comeback, a self-funded costume action epic based on the Swiss myth of William Tell, but other financing fell out, and his own blown savings yielded only 30 minutes of film. In the 1950s, his movie work would winnow down to indie films, capitalizing on his stardom at the expense of reality, typically miscasting him in younger roles, while he tried his hand at TV, briefly hosting a UK TV show, the Errol Flynn Theatre, and doing guest shots on American anthology shows, much of it just to stay on top of his mounting debts. His true and best received swan songs would be roles close to his own circumstances. First, in 1957, playing the life-worn drunk in a film adaptation of Hemingway's The Sun Also Rises, and in 1958, playing his besotted old friend Barrymore in Too Much Too Soon. Damita won his house in an alimony suit, making one of his boats his new primary residence, and he spent much of his final years self-exiled to Jamaica with his third wife, Patrice Wymore. Then, sailing the world, avoiding creditors and possibly the law, given that his on-board companion, Beverly Adland, was 16 when he met her. She would star in his final film, the unwatchable tax write-off Cuban Rebel Girls, 1959, ostensibly written by Flynn, who played himself as a war correspondent covering the revolution, and produced with the cooperation of Fidel Castro. In fall 1959, after a guest appearance on The Red Skelton Show, CBS, 1951-71, Flynn flew to Vancouver, BC, where he had a prospect to buy his yacht for a much-needed cash infusion, but abruptly fell ill there and, at age 50, died of heart attack. Doctors who examined him famously said his body bore the physical ravages of that of a 75-year-old. My greatest addiction? It is curiosity. Errol Flynn.